Welcome to our show, Oakland Is. I'm your host, Michael Lange. Today we're doing our second installment of a book written by Dr. Oba Tshaka entitled The Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. In our first installment, we were given an opportunity to study the just societies of Africa in the ancient classical terms. And we were able to understand a little bit more about the Tois people and also about the Numo twins. In this particular installment, we want to learn a little bit more about the application. How can we take the collective history and wisdom of ancient Africa and bring it into the 20th and the 21st century? With me is my co-host, Lachey Gatlin, and also Dr. Oba Tshaka rejoining us for installment 2. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Lachey, how are you?
Just fine, thank you.
Great. I know you had an opportunity to read Dr. Tshaka's book.
I did, you know, and I was fascinated with the wisdom that was there. It's a very long book, and I realized that there was so much information. It's not something that you can just sit down and read. You really need to study, and it's the type of book that you want to share with someone as you're studying it.
You know, and we're also possibly in a position here through our television work to maybe bring more series of this type to the public, because I'm sure that they want that food of thought to be able to understand how perhaps we can live in a just society where male and females are balanced and there is equity.
Exactly.
That'd be good.
Yeah, it would be good. Maybe we can talk about that. I know we have a little role and we want to set up for the audience. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to see?
Yeah, this is a presentation made to the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization, ASCAT, at their convention in Chicago in 1991. And this is dealing with one of the central themes in the book, which talks about the role of males and females in leadership.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to go to our roll-in, and then we'll be returning.
That's why less work has been done on Tasseti, Nubia, Kush, or Ethiopia, and anywhere else. Because they know whatever they come up with there, they're going to have trouble whitewashing it. So the thing is, notice the tradition. The Ethiopian had great social stability, meaning they had few struggles for power. Why? Because they had a system of the Kentucky queen mother and the king. And it was the notion that you empowered both the feminine and the masculine in the society. And in fact, you could not be king unless the queen mother nominated you to be king, and then the council of the people that represented all.
Thank you very much. You know, we're back. I wanted to ask you about how in ancient Africa, what was known as Kemet, Egypt as we know it popularly, how did it make it so that all of these systems came there and you were able to go back in and find it? I mean, does truth and history leave a paper trail?
Yes, and in the first discussion we talked about the Tois and how their system was really the foundational system for just societies, where all just males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. So what we can say is that while Egypt, or Kemet, represented the greatest achievement in ancient civilization of any people in the world, the greatest monuments, the pyramids, the greatest discoveries in mathematics and science and so forth. Whereas you cannot understand the great achievements of African people without understanding Kemet, you cannot understand the just societies on which Kemet, Ethiopia, and many other African societies was based unless we understand the foundational basis of the first people in the world, who are the Tois people. The paper trail is in the 14 ancient and traditional African families that I had to examine in chapter 6, and I'll only speak of a few.
Okay, please.
In the case of the Tois, it's very clear that they are the first human beings on the planet. The Europeans call them pygmies. They lived in two types of societies. One was a hunting society, the other was a hunting-gathering society. And in both societies, men and women were equal in the way in which they lived. In the hunting societies, they had what they called a net hunt. Men and women would go out with a net, a big net, to catch any game they could. The men were on one side, the women were on the other side. The women would make a noise, whistle, the game would come in, the men would spear it. They would then take it back and divide it equally. Among them, while the male is the father and the female is the mother, when it comes to all decisions, they're made equally. They also have what's called the hunter-gatherer society. The men are the bowmen, they are the archers, they hunt. The women gather the shrubs. They are semi-nomadic, they move from place to place. The women are in charge of all the food supplies, and the men are in charge of the meat, the agricultural food supplies and the meat. And so here we see the equality is based on responsibility preceding rights. Women are responsible for the food supply, so they have the right to determine and the power to determine how it's distributed. Men are responsible for the game. They have a right to determine how it's distributed. Now, we can see in the Tois society, where just males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society, how that then played out. We have a chart over here where if you look at the chart, there is an example on the chart of the Afrikbi Igbo. And the Afrikbi Igbo are people who live in Nigeria. It's the third group listed on the chart, the second chart.
Okay.
And they are what's called twin unilineal, which means that the father, the male's last name comes from his father. The female's last name comes from the mother. But in almost every area of life among the Afrikbo Igbo, things are done according to males and females cooperating. In agriculture, they both work almost equally. The women have to work on the men's yan crop, but the women work on the man's crop. That's the inequality. But in that system, they both work in agriculture. When it comes to house building, the man has a role, the female has a role. When it comes to fishing, there's a place for the woman to fish, there's a place for the man to fish. The point I want to make, and this is clearest in the Yoruba system, is that from the most equal system of the Tois that were very small, evolved the Afrikbo Igbo, who were slightly larger but classless, no kings and queens, to larger societies of hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of people, such as the Yoruba. And the Yoruba, many of us come from West Africa. The Yoruba have a system where the men have certain economic responsibilities and the women do. The men are in charge of agriculture. In most African societies, the women are. And the woman is in charge of the marketplace. When the woman dies, all her goods go to her female heirs. When the man dies, all his goods go to his male heirs. Why? Because rights are based on responsibility. A man would not get what the woman sells in the marketplace because he doesn't work the marketplace. This is what I call parallel complementary empowerment in systems where there's equality, but it's through the line of the male and it's through the line of the female. To make it short, my studies show this, that the most African family systems, ancient and pre-European, are neither matriarchy nor patriarchy, because they're neither ruled by men or women. They're neither matrilineal nor patrilineal, which usually means your last name comes from your mother or father, and descent goes through that line, usually the eldest male in patrilineal or the female in matrilineal. What I found is that most African family systems are twin-lineal. And if you think about it, in reality, America is patriarchal.
Right.
Your last name comes from your father.
Right.
You're descended from the father. But are you? You're descended from your mother and your father.
You
Your
speak of
grandmother
the
and your
erosion
grandfather.
of this, and you see that it's the infiltration of the Europeans that started to erode this?
Yes. But it's real key to get this twin lineal thing together that we understood that the empowerment of a people was not through empowering the man over the woman or the woman over the man, but men and women jointly. That was the key. Now, the erosion is very important because, as I note in chapter 7, with the coming of the European, also with the coming of the Arab, and I must say that there was an early erosion that precedes the European or the Arab, and that was the inequality that occurred between Africans. And this is a painful discussion. And often the inequality was minor, but it was enough to tip the scales. You have to go to the oral tradition to understand this. Among the Kikuyu of Kenya, they have a story. And the story is always telling you about a historical event. At one time, the women ruled. They were matriarchal. And the men decided to get all the women pregnant at the same time. That would be pretty hard to do, but they did. And then they moved to seize power. But in the African way, The women said, but the last name of our children will come from us. So you can't call that patriarchy, because in patriarchy, your last name comes from your father. And that means that women held on to other power, but men began to grab village decision-making, national decision-making. The Yoruba, Chief Priest Ifeyemi, who is a high priest in the Yoruba religion, says that in the ancient times, the Yoruba were equal, male and female. And then the men took power from the women. And the women put magic on the men. Does this sound familiar? If you come from Louisiana, you've heard about this. And the men called on God. And God said everything can be okay as long as you go back to balance. They went back to balance for a while, and then the men seized power from women. Part of this occurs through struggles between men and women. Men were concerned about the fact that they wanted to have the final say-so. If a marriage broke up, they wanted to have the children. Children are the most important thing in African families. They're the reward of life. Part of this had to do in Ghana with the fact there was a time where women ruled and then war came. And when war came, the women were not fit to lead the war parties, though they fought. The men were the strongest fighters. And at that time, there was a council called the War Council. All the women had a menstrual cycle at the same time, all the queen mothers. You know that didn't happen. So the brothers said, mothers of the nation, let us share this power. And so a system was created where the royal queen mothers nominated the most just royal male to be king or village chief or whatnot. And then a balanced male-female thing developed. So I want to stress this. The first erosion began as the reciprocity principle between African men and women started to become unbalanced. But with the coming of the European, with slavery, with colonialism. Colonialism is where people come to someone else's country and take over their government, take over their economy, and often try and control their culture. And neo-colonialism, which is what exists now on the African continent, where you have Western economic, Western cultural, educational, political, and religious systems often dictating what's going on. And in America, slavery, and then with the coming of the post-industrial computer economy. All these things had their influence. To be brief, in Africa, the most important thing that happened that affected the balance between males and females was that the European came in with a worldview that was very much against women being on an equal level with men. And their economy automatically worked against the balance that we had. And so one of the things that happened is the European economy became one where certain things that men had to do took them outside of the family. They had to go and work in the mines in South Africa, or they had to go into the cities to make money to pay taxes. And so this meant that no longer were men and women playing the balanced role in agriculture. Now in Africa, 60 to 80% of the food is provided by women. And men are marginalized, often without work. So one of the things this did was to erode the balance between male and female, but it didn't destroy it. In the United States, slavery did an interesting thing, because on the plantation, black men and black women were equally exploited. The black woman had to work from can't see to can see, and the black man. Therefore, what you saw was, in some senses, the agricultural system reinforced some of the need for cooperation between black men and black women. Slavery destroyed the lineage system, which was the system of governance in Africa where you had lineage councils made up of extended families. But it did not destroy the extended family. We kept the extended family together.
Are you saying that it exists even today? That there are surviving things from Africa out of slavery to the modern times?
Yeah, the most important survival, and it's been weakened by the post-industrial, computer-driven, urbanized economy, has been the extended family. The extended family was a system in which elders were held in high respect. On the plantation, you didn't look an elder directly in the eye, and you didn't raise your voice. And that was true in our communities.
And this is because there was often case that the families weren't allowed to stay together. So you did have the extended families where people were coming together out of necessity.
Well, you see, the thing is, on the plantation, where families were broken up, we usually formed new families. And what's often not looked at, Gutman in his work on the black family and slavery documents this very well, is that not all slave masters mated the man and the woman. In many cases, they were just concerned to see that children came into being, you know. And what happened is we had our own mating practices, and many of them were carryovers from Africa. For example, in the oral traditions I cited in the book, there are a number of them where a man wants to marry a woman, he goes to their family to ask permission. That's the way it worked in Africa. But in cases where that didn't happen, there was still the idea of the man and woman making a decision about who their mate would be. And if they got separated, forming a new relationship. But the extended family on the plantation and now was not only blood relatives, it was friends and acquaintances. Wade Nobles and Lawford Goddard have documented that very clearly, and we know that. Now, the key thing in the United States is this. I argue that while slavery did damage to the family, we held on to the family. The data supports it. By 1900, 75% of all black males and females, adults, were married. There was a greater percentage of black men and women married than white men and white women. Up to 1960, 75% of all black households had a man and a woman in them, a husband and a wife in them. Now, what happens in the 60s is in many ways more devastating than what happened during slavery, because there's a greater erosion in the black family between, Dr. Nathan Hare notes this, between 1968 and the present than between 1619 and 1968. All we have to do is look at the data.
You speak of black singlehood. What is that?
Well, I'm going to come to that. But I mean, if you note today, roughly 38% of all black households have a husband and a wife in them. And the key thing to understand is what happened. I argue two fundamental things happened that I can only go into briefly here. One is the powerful forces of television, the powerful forces of the dollar, the urban economy, the powerful forces of individualism, the powerful forces of the Western worldview that pretends to believe in morality, but it really believes in anything goes, because slavery is the most amoral, immoral thing you could ever think of. This is a system based on killing Native Americans, enslaving Africans, the rich get rich and the poor get poor. What I'm arguing is, on the one hand, what happened in the 60s is there was often an unconscious choice between two cultures, between the nuclear family European culture and the extended family African culture. Too many of us followed the European way. Between thinking of the race first and thinking of me first. Most of our younger people think of themselves as individuals, and I'm not knocking them. That's the result of urbanization. And on the other hand, there is the erosion of the black family caused by the computer-driven economy. There's a blues song that says, "The computer took my job," right? The reason why most black men are not heads of households or equal in the house is because they don't have a job to support their family. Because the blue-collar skills of my father with an 8th grade education or less is not sufficient to support a family. So that the thing is, these two forces have working to weaken our families. But this is the point I would make, and this is the fundamental point. We broke the back of slavery. We broke the back of segregation through the equalitarian principle in the family. Let me explain that. On the plantation, it was the Harriet Tubmans and the Nat Turners putting their heads together that busted up slavery. In the case of segregation, all you have to do is look at the Montgomery bus boycott. It was the E.D. Nixons, a Pullman car porter, head of the NAACP, and a Rosa Parks, the black preachers and the Black Women's Political Council. It was black men and women putting their heads together that destroyed Jim Crow. And so what I'm saying is that while our families have been weakened by slavery, we held on to this principle of the male understanding he ain't gonna get nowhere without the female, and the female understanding she ain't gonna get nowhere without the male. And now while that principle is weak, it is still there. It has to be revived. It's the secret to our survival.
I have a question I must ask then. What is the importance of having an Afrocentric curriculum so that, one, we can learn our past, going back to ancient Africa, as well as the Brown versus the Board of Education, the Montgomery bus boycott, and all those other things? Is it important to have an Afrocentric curriculum?
Yeah, what's really important about that is that there's a third awakening going on among our people right now. It's an Afrocentric cultural renaissance. There's a sister named Emma Rogers who coined this in Dallas, Texas. She has a black bookstore.
How recent is it? In the last 5 years?
No, since 1984.
Okay.
We can earmark it with this Afrocentric educational movement. Since Dr. Asa Hilliard, with the support of the National Black United Front, which I'm vice chair of, launched this African American baseline curriculum project, where our best scholars got together and put together a curriculum for the public schools and our independent black schools in history, in language arts, in math, in science, and music, in every area. And that's been spread across the United States. The key thing about this education is, yeah, that's very important, but that the reason that this education is now important is we have the strongest team of African scholars in the African world under the titular leadership of the now deceased Dr. Cheikh Anta Diop. In the United States, we have the strongest team of African scholars who are laying the basis for an African worldview, who are laying the basis for strengthening the African and African American family, strengthening African and African American communities. So it's very vital that our students learn that humanity began in Africa. It's very vital that they know that the world's first civilization was Ethiopia, that the greatest achievement in ancient civilization was Kemet, and these were black, and the most just societies were among the Tois. And when they understand that, they can understand that if we could build the first families, we can rebuild the black family today. If we could build the world's first nations and the most just ones, then we can take the most just principles that come out of these societies and apply them to this society, to Africa and the African diaspora.
Which is the next question. The educational curriculum would be one part of the puzzle, and the implementation in the black community, of which there may be 100 cities right now that may understand a return to an African principle.
Now, here's a key point on that. I think that it's very important to understand that the society is undergoing transformation. The world is. The old systems of governance don't work anymore. Take the European. This idea that the white male is qualified to run the world, let alone this society, doesn't work anymore. Why? Because by 2020, the majority of this country will be black, brown, red, and yellow, right? With Africans being, though some say differently, the largest group among the people of color. Some say the Latino, but when they say the Latino, they're taking the African Puerto Rican, they're taking the African Cuban, and many others and counting them as Latino. They black. You understand? Now the thing is, I think it's crucial to understand that this twin lineal family system that is the basis for the justice of African families, where males are not on top of females and females are not on top of males, is really the model for revitalizing the African family, the African American family, and the dysfunctional family. Most of us will think I'm talking about black people when I say dysfunctional. Yes, some of us come from dysfunctional families. If you went through slavery, you would. I'm talking about the European family, which is based on a dysfunctional family model, which is that the man has all authority. That's why Clinton can be in charge of deciding what is final for his cabinet. That's why he can, Johnson could declare war in Vietnam without a decision coming from the Congress. We wouldn't allow that to happen in our society. So what I'm arguing is this, that just as single white males can't run the political system, we have what some of our black family researchers call role failure in the normative sense. Now this is talking to the brother on the street. And I talk to a brother who's in my family who knows what I'm talking about right now. This means that it is no longer possible for the black male to support his family on his own. That is also true for the white male as well. And if you cannot support your family on your own, you can't govern it on your own. You understand? So what this means is the economic conditions of the society dictate, the social and cultural conditions dictate that there's going to have to be a pooling of resources in the family and a pooling of brain power in the family. And we can't go on what just comes off the head of one person. So there's going to have to be a transformation of mindset.
This is the twin lineal system.
Twin lineal system.
So this is what you say is a solution. You know, in our closing moments, we only have about a minute or so left, but can you give us the paradigm or the structures that we would need to implement the first stages of a twin lineal system?
In the family, to understand that there's no male without the female.
Okay.
To understand that if the black male is going to be brought back into the family must not only be a cultural unit that passes on knowledge, but an economic unit that takes the skills of a Whitney Houston, that takes the skills of a Michael Jackson family, that takes the beautiful skills of black people and markets them, controls them, distributes them, and serves as the basic employer in the black community. It means for community organizations, we have to understand that males and females are going to have to be equally empowered to run the organizations in our community. It means in the black church that while there are Jones Methodist churches, Allen Temple churches that are very successful based on male-female leadership, but mainly male leadership, by and large, most of us need help. And so I think that it's going to be this complementary interaction of male and female that's going to be key to our liberation, because our power is in our people.
And whereas the black family is the basis.
And it's the foundation.
Well, we want to thank you very much. Lachey, I know you probably have some closing comments. You had a chance to read the work. And
I did. And you know, it's too much to cover in just a short time. You know, with every point that you made, there's another point coming up.
We have an 800 number.
Definitely, and I can only suggest to people to get the book and to study it. Don't just read it, study it, share it with your family.
Dr. Toshaka, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And it's really been enlightening.
Yeah, really.
Really appreciate the research and the homework to go in. It's taken 35 years really to do this work.
Yeah.
Incredible. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. So long.